I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1
What's
podcast.
up, everybody? Andrew Clear here from the F1 Podcast, bringing you season 5, episode 4. I am joined by one of the best friends of the show, Tyler. Welcome to the show today. How are you doing, my man?
Thanks, Andrew. I'm doing well. It's been a while since I've been on the pod, and season five. Wow, that's a big number. You guys have been going at it for a long time now. So
I
congrats. It's been a journey.
I remember when we started post Hungary 2021, and it's kind of gone off
Great
from there.
race.
Great start, great
Esteban
race to
Ocon
start
won.
with.
Yeah, that was a crazy race. Bottas went bowling. Max had half a car. What a time to start a pod.
I know Stroll decided to go bowling a little bit too into Charles. I'm sure Matt, Richie wasn't very happy about that. Like he probably wasn't happy about this past weekend as well.
Ooh, some foreshadowing there.
Ugh.
I think we have some not so positive things to say about Ferrari, but we'll save that for a bit.
If you're wondering where John and Eric are on the show, they're both away on vacation. So, we have the next person best up, in my opinion, Tyler. We have a lot of questions this week, especially about Red Bull. There's some news that came out. We'll dive into that a little later. But first, the Chinese Grand Prix, the sprint race on Saturday. Lewis Hamilton took pole for Ferrari in the sprint race and was able to convert that into a win. What a surprise!
Yeah, that's the word I would use as well. I was surprised that he was able to hold off not only Max but Oscar behind him. I mean the key theme with McLaren this year, and it's early, is that the race pace is really where they dominate. I mean they've had a couple 1-2s so far in qualifying, but there's always been that chance that someone else could sneak up and take pole. I mean we saw it with the sprint pole from Lewis. But the race pace is really where that McLaren comes alive. And so I thought Lewis would just be, you know, trying to hang on for dear life. And Oscar never really got to a place where it was dangerous. And, maybe if it was 5, 6, 7 laps more, he would have. And in the race, we kind of saw that play out. But, it was a great management by Lewis to bring that one home. I was surprised.
And I think what kind of threw everybody off was the new tarmac that was laid down in Shanghai. It really degged the tires up pretty good. And I mean,
Yeah.
we heard a lot of people complaining about, especially front left graining early on with all the right-handed turns. So I wasn't sure how Ferrari were going to survive, as you mentioned, because McLaren have such great race pace. But I was shocked. Oscar really stepped up in the sprint race. Lando had a
Mhm.
tough start. He went off into the grass by himself.
Yeah, he lost a position, maybe two at the start, and then he was stuck behind. What was it, Lance Stroll? He was stuck behind for laps and
Lance,
laps and laps.
Lance
I
Stroll?
Who had
What?
that on their bingo card? That an Aston Martin would be holding up a McLaren. I mean, that was wild to see.
Who would have ever thought that Lance Stroll would be the number one driver at Aston Martin as well? Not me.
Oof. Yikes.
But honestly, though, Max had a great race as well. Starting in P2, yes, he wasn't able to hold off Oscar in that position. But when you compare him to his then teammate Liam Lawson, who was P20, um, we'll ask after. I'm gonna ask you a question after the race. I kind of decided, but I think overall that was an incredible race by Max. I don't think he could have done better, in my opinion. I think P3 was probably the most he was going to get out of that car on Saturday.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I saw the race does their driver rankings after every single Grand Prix, and they had Max at number one. And it's hard to disagree with the logic there, which is that he maximized the effort. I mean, Oscar deserves a lot of credit for the win in the actual race. Lewis deserves a lot of credit for the sprint. But if you look at the entire weekend, you can't say that Max left any pace out there on the track in the sprint or in the race. And I mean, I think that speaks to just the level that he's at right now. He's in his late 20s, he's in his prime. This is the best version of Max Verstappen you're going to see. And, even if the car's not there, you know that every single weekend he's going to get the most out of it. And I think that speaks to the lack of pace that's in the Red Bull, that the max that he has is P4, P3 in the sprint. But yeah, I mean, it was a great weekend personally for Max. There's no doubt about that.
I agree, and it's kind of funny to see. Well, it's interesting to see, in my opinion, how Max is just carrying that team on his shoulders, and going into the race on Sunday. tough qualifying, right? We had Oscar in P1 on pole. George Russell, who was hooked up in the sprint race, my I add you, he had a great sprint race, puts
Hmm.
himself up for a P2 start, and then the second row was Lando and Max. But is Mercedes kind of like a dark horse right now that we need to talk about more, or are we going to let them kind of be like a quiet assassin in this championship race?
It's a great question. I think it's too early. I mean, that's the classic answer to give after two Grand Prix, and maybe it's a bit of a lame answer, but I just think if you look at last year, there were moments where the Mercedes looked pacey. It looked like it could compete at times, and that was in limited windows, and it happened to be where the temperature wasn't high, the tires didn't dag, the race pace was there. They were able to throw it up in qualifying. And if you look at the last couple races, it was cold and wet in Australia. It was cooler in China. Cooler it wasn't cool necessarily, but I think coming up once we get to the European legs and we get to the summer and we're getting to Spain where it's 30 degrees and races like that, I think we're probably going to see them struggle because the Mercedes has such a slim operating window. They're going to struggle to keep that package together in certain conditions, but in the right conditions and with George at the helm, clearly there's some pace. There's some raw pace in that Mercedes. And so I think we'll see a bit of an up and down year from them where, track dependent, condition dependent, we'll see them up there battling with Ferrari, with McLaren, with Red Bull, maybe. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens with that car. Um, but yeah, certainly. I mean, George can mix it up, and it was good to see that this weekend.
Yeah, and his teammate wasn't too far off of him, which was great to see. But this race
Hmm.
was kind of unfortunately a bit of a snooze fest. It was more
That
so
was
just
terrible.
it was terrible. I mean, let's call a spade
Let's
a
call it
spade.
what it
It was
is.
awful. The only thing exciting was Alonso's brake going on fire on lap four, which is another DNF for Alonso. And as an Aston Martin fan, you hate to see it because, for me, I've always been, to me, Alonso's number one driver, Stroll's the number two driver. But Lance is making me eat my words quite a bit this season so far based on his performance. It was, how long could you have, if you were on the hards to start, how long could you have make those tires last? And he was a tire whisperer. I think he made it to,
Mhm.
yeah, lap 36 on the hards. And I know he didn't finish in a points position, but to be honest with you, with the development of that car, he kept it very competitive to begin with. And he was holding off in P7 there for quite a bit against some of the medium tire runners that had then transitioned into new hards.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I never know what to say about Lance Stroll. I mean, we know where if he's at the maximum, his ceiling, he's got a pole in Formula One, right? So there's clearly pace in there somewhere. It's just most weekends you come away feeling a bit dissatisfied because it feels like he's not 100% there in terms of effort, in terms of intensity. I don't know what you want to call it. There's that intangible with him, on top of just overall lacking a little bit of pace that makes it frustrating to watch him, right? And clearly there are moments in there where it looks like he can be a competitive driver in Formula One, but there's just too many times where you come away feeling like, what is this guy? You have more questions than you have answers, and I think that's the frustrating thing about watching Stroll race in Formula One.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like a focus issue in that case. Like for instance, like Brazil last year,
Hmm.
right? Going off into the gravel on like, what like to me, that's just focus related, right? You're not
Hmm.
into it. There's no initiative being driven, but it's Stroll can be that guy. And I'm just thinking if the more and more noise that surrounds him, maybe he's happy now with Adrian Newey being there, in that sense of a car kind of going in that direction. But I don't know. It's quite interesting. But in my opinion, this weekend, Tyler, I've this again, too early to call, but I think Oscar is now the front runner for the world championship over Lando, in my opinion.
Love it. It's a spicy take, but I agree with it. I'm there. I why not? I
Dominated
think.
him this weekend. He was the clear number one. And like, yeah, Australia,
Mhm.
he was number two, and I get that they were behind and unlucky, let's say, hitting the tire at the wrong time. He should have scored massive points. But in my opinion, he was the driver of the weekend,
Yeah,
Oscar.
and I think on the flip side, sneaky, Lando didn't really take a lot of flack, I think, in the public sort of space because we were focused on other things. We are focused on Lewis winning the sprint. We're focused on Piastri winning the race. We're focused on all the retirements and the Ferrari disqualification, which we'll get to. So people aren't really talking about Lando having a really mediocre weekend. He was not good in sprint qualifying. He was not good in the sprint. He qualified on the second row. His teammates on pole. The McLaren is clearly the fastest car, and when that's the case, we don't know how long that will last for with other teams developing throughout the year. We saw that with Red Bull last year, dominated the first 5 or 6 races, fell off a cliff at the end of the year. And so it's really critical for Lando to make hay in the early part of the races where McLaren does have that pace advantage. And taking points off your teammate and not being able to be sort of right there, in every situation where you can capitalize may hurt him when we get, to the later stages
Well,
of the season. And I think this was a huge race for Piastri and his chances of competing for a World Drivers' Championship.
because in my opinion, I agree with all of that in the sense too that if Piastri didn't go off in Australia, I think he's leading the championship based on points alone, right? I think he finishes P2
Hmm.
behind Oscar. So, but then the net result cancels each other out based on this previous week's GP, and then he had more points than him in the sprint. So, in essence, Oscar should be leading the championship right now and not Lando. And I think people are overseeing him on that right now. I don't think people take Oscar as serious as they should. I think because Lando's the golden boy, right? He's British. He's kind of like they want him to be the next Lewis Hamilton, right? In terms of like that success. They're bringing to McLaren, right? I think people are tired of seeing Mercedes win, right? Maybe not so much George, so that's why they kind of want to see that new kind of upstart kick in with Lando. But with that said, I think Oscar's more pacier. He doesn't care as much, I think, as Lando does. He's just a matter of focus on getting the win. He doesn't give a shit about what his teammates think, and he's there to win, which I love that attitude for Oscar. And he defended off Norris pretty well. He defended off Russell at the start really well, especially going to that first, really weird turn there at Shanghai. But overall, great race for Oscar in that case. But I got the big question for you, Tyler. Red Bull this weekend were, let's say, all over the map. I mean, you had Max finishing P4, which was fantastic. Lawson finishing, I think it was P14, especially after all of the hoopla with the disqualifications and whatnot. My real question is when I watch that car race, I cannot tell where they are in terms of development compared to all the other teams because I feel like they've created a car that really is only drivable for Max and the way he styles it, but they've gone off a tangent now where I don't know where they even know where the development is going because even he has issues with the development, but he's still making that car sing as best as it can. While clearly you have a guy like Lawson who can't even fight through the back of the midfield or at the back of the pack to get into the points. So I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, and we were speaking about this a little bit before we started recording, but they have really had development issues with the car going back 2 or 3 years, if you think about it. And Max was just able to paper over those issues because of his pace, his raw pace. And so I think that led Red Bull down a development path that was miscalculated, that was incorrect. And I think they're seeing that now. And the challenge is when you go down a road that long down a development path, and it is the wrong development path, it becomes very difficult to fix it because now you're going back to the wind tunnel. You're trying to correlate what's on the track to what's in the tile, what you're seeing with the CAD, and I think they're going to struggle. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing and has been talked about a lot is, Max likes a car with a lot of front end, right? That's really sharp, and what happens is when the front end gets too sharp, it leads to oversteer. So you get understeer in the corner entry and oversteer in the exit, which makes the car borderline undrivable. And I think, Lawson is a prime candidate or illustration of that happening because he literally could not control the car in mid to high speed corners. It was a disaster for him, and that's one of the reasons why he struggles so much in that car. Yeah, I mean, as a fan of Max, I'm concerned because I don't see a clear path to them developing their way out of this. And if they can't, Max can finish P2, P3, P4 all he wants, maximize the effort. That's all great. But if you're not getting race wins, you're not competing for the drivers' championship. I'm sorry. Even in a year where it's very tight, you may stay in the mix, but if he's not competing for race victories by race, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's over. So I would be concerned if I was him.
It's funny, yeah, because my next question was going to be, if you're Christian Horner, when do you start focusing on development for 2026 and kind of just calling this year a year of write-off, right? Because you have a defending World Drivers' Championship, right? Could be his fifth Drivers' Championship in a row. But I think the reality is set that that is not going to happen based on the way the car is operating currently, right? And so at what point does it tip over to now let's start focusing on 2026 development so that we can give Max a competitive car under the new regulations?
I mean, it's a slippery slope. Like anytime that you're in even, a slim shot at competing for the World Drivers' Championship, which Red Bull certainly is and Max certainly is, I think you got to take it because you could abandon everything right now and start focusing your efforts on the 2026 car, and it could still be terrible. Like you don't know, you could still be outdeveloped by McLaren or by Mercedes. A lot of rumors from a lot of prominent F1 journalists seem to think that the next era of regulations is going to be an engine formula. Who makes the best engines? Mercedes, right?
Hmm.
So you could do all this, great planning and abandon the championship to focus all your efforts on next year and still come up short. And so I think, while you can't put all your eggs into the present basket, you can't just abandon the current, drivers championship chase for the hope of maybe being in a similar position next year. So all that to say, I mean, it's a very complicated decision. At some point, you do need to make the switch.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's something you can do this early in the season. I think, if we're at the summer break and Max is 70 points back of, Oscar Orlando, then we have a different conversation to be had. But at this point, you have to try and develop that car the best you can and see if you can compete.
No, I agree. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's such a tough slope, right? Like, there's so much to go. This is race two, right? Round two
Yeah,
of
it's
24,
crazy.
right? We're
It's
already
only
having
race
these
two. I feel like
conversations.
that perspective is everything because it is only two races and there's so much season to go. And like we were saying earlier, last year Red Bull dominated for six. It looked like it was going to be a runaway again. And then the season completely flipped. Like who knows where we're going to be in a month, right? So that's the crazy thing about all of these conversations we're having is that it could all be irrelevant in, 3 or 4 weeks.
So, based on this weekend, I wanted you to give me one winner and one loser of the, let's say, of Shanghai in an essence.
Oof. I mean, I think the winner has to be Oscar for all the reasons that we said. I mean, I think he's clearly cemented himself as a key contender to beat Norris for the World Drivers' Championship if that McLaren can stay in the hunt, which I think we all think it will. And losers, I think also very obvious. It's a certain Scarlet Red team who there's a host of the show who's not here who's particularly fond of them. I mean, just talk about the disaster class for Ferrari. I mean, what do you make of it, Andrew? From my perspective, it
Oh,
was, Ferrari as I'm used to seeing it. But yeah, I
I
mean, what a
mean,
disaster for them.
there's three words. We're back, baby. And
I
we're
thought you were going to
back.
say, we are checking. I thought that's what you were going to say.
No, but I think this is
uh,
F1 in an essence the last couple of years, right? It's so crazy because Ferrari are so Jekyll and Hyde in the way they are in nature, right? They were such a
mhm.
great sprint race. Even like I believe Leclerc, did well in the sprint, right? Hamilton wins the sprint, and then they were kind of just the third fastest car out there during the race, and or maybe not even. I
Yeah,
mean, like yeah, I would say the third, right? Like let's say in my opinion, Red Bull's four because Max made it the third technically
I'm
based
with you.
off of finishing positions. But yeah, Leclerc and Hamilton. I mean, Hamilton having to deal with the engineering team in his ear the entire race. Like, I mean, about the whole position swap, and he's like, "I'll let you know when we're doing it. Let me have a chance here." Like, it was just a disaster class on the radio again for that. And then we get to the final. They finished P5. Well, they finished what P5 and P6
P5 and
originally.
P6 on the road. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then we get afterwards, and oh, the two technical directives from the stewards come after the race. Charles Leclerc with 1 kilogram underweight. And I bet you is because he tried to make that stint of 41 laps on the hard tire go that he probably
Yep.
lost so much rubber like um Russell did in Belgium last year. Side note, which I didn't like how DTS didn't depict that was the case in their episode, but nevertheless, a little side tangent there. And then Hamilton with the plank wear, it was thinned out by like probably it's like a millimeter, right? Like literally the size of this ruler, right? But like the width of this ruler, but oh, still you lose like how many points? You lose like 18 points on the weekend. And
Yep.
you know what the scary part is? I wish John was here to see his reaction. Both Lewis and Charles are now behind Lance Stroll in the World Drivers' Championship.
You lose.
I didn't even sound right when you say it out loud.
I
That sounds.
know.
I can't believe it. I mean, what a disaster for Ferrari. And it'd be one thing if, hey, they're both 1 kilogram underweight. We miscalculated the one-stop strategy. I could probably live with that. Still unacceptable in Formula One. Let's be very clear. There are 8 other teams. I say eight because Alpine is kind of getting a pass here. We're not really
Yeah.
talking about them, but they had the same problem.
No
There are eight
problem.
other teams that didn't make this mistake and don't make this mistake, right? In general, we haven't seen mistakes like this from Red Bull ever. When's the last time McLaren had a car that was underweight? Never,
Never.
right? Not in this modern era with their two current drivers. So unacceptable from Ferrari if that was the case. But to make two separate mistakes, two separate errors, one related to plank wear, one related to the weight issue that Charles had. It's to me, it speaks to a lot of issues that are deep rooted within Ferrari, right? And I mean, it's two different team principles now where we've had similar issues of just being unorganized, chaos, whatever you want to call it. I would be concerned because that means it's not a leadership issue. It's deeply ingrained somewhere in the culture of Ferrari. I don't know if it's trackside engineering. I don't know if it's factory related. I don't even know what to say at this point. But it's just this is Ferrari. This is who they are. I'm not even surprised at this point.
I would love it'd be hilarious if they come out next week and I mean like tear the time off in Suzuka, lo and behold to have like a crash or a DNF again. Right? That's just kind of the
Mhm.
way it goes, right, for Ferrari. And I feel bad for the Tifosi in a sense because you and I are fans of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we go through this pain every year where we have
Yep.
such high hopes, and then we get brought down to so quick, and then we get high hopes brought to it's just like a roller coaster of emotions, right? So again, it's a Ferrari, but I agree, Tyler, it is deep rooted somewhere. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's an overall management issue at the top, but I thought Fred was turning the corner on this team, right? Especially when you sign a guy like Lewis Hamilton. Oh my God. But then just to have this happen in the same weekend is just, I don't
There's
know.
just bad juju at Ferrari. I don't
Yeah,
know what it is. There's something you can't even describe what it is. That's what's so frustrating, I think, if you're a Ferrari fan, is you can't pinpoint it. You can't blame it on Fred. Fred's a great team principal, right? And it'd be easier as a fan if you had somebody to blame, but you don't. Because it's kind of everything, right? It's all sort of encompassing. And I think if you're a Ferrari fan, I'd be absolutely losing my marbles because it's going to be such a tight year. And those 18 points you're talking about are massive. Right? That could be the difference between first or P4
I
in the
know.
championship. We don't know because it's going to be likely very very tight. So yeah, I'd be absolutely losing my mind if I was Ricci and the rest of the Tifosi.
Oh, but I think for me, one big winner this weekend was Haas. They be able to secure double points this weekend. I know based on DQs and what DSQs, but I mean, hey, they ran a clean race on Sunday, able to score points, with Ocon being up there. Berriman was awesome. I just love the
Mhm.
chow. See you later, sayonara. Have a nice day. On his overtakes, he was fantastic there. I do think one of my losers, though, we're going to talk about the biggest loser of the weekend, but one of my smaller losers, I would say, I don't know about you, but I don't think Carlos Sainz had a fantastic weekend. He looked super slow in that Williams. I know it's a new team. I know he's trying to get handles on the new car, but beat out by Albon in the race as well. He only got up to P10 because of the disqualifications. I also in the sprint, he was non-existent.
No, I don't know what's going on with Carlos. I mean, he was great in the first few sessions of the year, right? Qualifying in Australia is very strong. He's right there with Alex. He crashes in the race, obviously in the wet, and then he turns up to China and he's just purely lacking pace. I mean, straight up, he was behind Alex from the get-go. And in practice, he didn't look particularly comfortable in that car. He in sprint qualifying in both race sessions. So I don't know what's going on with Carlos. I thought he was going to be taking the fight to Alex. I mean, we know how talented a driver he is. There's been some rumors that he's on a second chassis or a spare chassis, and that's cost cap related from Williams, and they're prioritizing Alex. But that's just all rumors at this point. And until something is confirmed, we have to assume that he's just not comfortable in that car and he's lacking a bit of pace, which is disappointing to see.
Yeah, and that I don't think that's what when James Vowles brought him in, that's not what he depicted, right? He's wanting both cars to be kind of near towards that points battle, right? Albin has kind of carried the load so far this season.
Totally.
And I do think Sainz will pull around. He is a guy that can adapt to cars, but I don't know if it had to do with that initial crash, if that's something kind of in the back of his mind when, racing now in that case. And if so, he needs to have to find a way to get out of that because it's only hurting his team from there. But Tyler, the biggest news of the weekend of the week. I mean, after a dismal performance in Australia and after an even probably worse performance in China, Ralph Schumacher announced earlier this week, and I didn't want to say anything until it was confirmed by at least ESPN, Sky Sports, Red Bull themselves. But Yuki Tsunoda has been promoted from V-Card to Red Bull and has taken over Liam Lawson's seat after, oh, let me check. Oh, yeah, two GPs and one sprint race. What are your thoughts? What is your initial reaction to this news, Tyler?
So initial reaction from me, and I do feel for Liam. I mean, it's a really tough situation for him, but I'm excited. I mean, I from the get-go thought Yuki deserved this seat. I mean, he's been in the junior team in AlphaTauri and Racing Bulls, whatever you want to call it, for I think this is his fourth season, fifth season. So he's a veteran now in F1, especially if you look at how many rookies are on the grid, right? Like Yuki is a senior veteran, which is crazy to say out loud. And he's shown in the last few years quite a bit of development and pace. Like I thought straight up he had earned at least a shot at taking, that second seat at the Red Bull. And so I think he's getting now what he deserves. And I'm excited to see how that pans out for him. But to turf a driver after two races is insane, even for Red Bull, who is as cutthroat as it gets in Formula One. Two races is a whole nother level. But I think that just shows how much pressure they're under to compete this year. They can't afford to have a guy, trying to figure it out in P20 when his teammates in P4 or P3. So, yeah, I mean, I was shocked.
I'm shocked. In the sense that Liam has never he's considered a rookie, right? He's never had a full season. He hasn't driven around Australia.
Mhm.
He's never competed in China. You're giving him a car that's clearly flawed, and you're expecting him to get into the points, right? And not I didn't expect him to be this abysmal, but unfortunately, I just think he has now become a product of desperation at Red Bull, right? No, as you mentioned, right? You talked about it, knowing where the car is and knowing that if they want to compete for any sniff of constructors or drivers, right, they need two drivers in that seat. And Yuki does provide him the best approach. I don't know why they went with Lawson to start with this season. I don't know if they were trying to protect Yuki or was this the plan all along, Tyler? Like to give kind of Lawson the bad cars, like to start, maybe terrible setup so that, because Honda's a huge sponsor of Yuki, right? And now he's going to be debuting under Red Bull at home. And I don't
Yeah.
know if there is some, background influences there that made some of these decisions to put Lawson in the seat? Because I agree, to me, Lawson and Hadjar should have been probably, in thought process, probably should have been the 1-2 at VCarb to start the season with Yuki as the number two driver. Now, were they concerned? I don't know, because I've heard rumors that Checo and Max were concerned that Yuki moving to the second seat would ruin his career, in essence, right? Which it has done for, okay, Gasly, Albon, Checo now, Lawson. I mean, this is Max's fifth teammate after Ricardo at Red Bull.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm shocked, but I think it's a little unjust to give him only two races and then he gets the boot, but I don't think they have a choice right now based on the way that car is performing.
I totally agree. I don't think they did have a choice. And to your point on, is it a sort of death sentence for Yuki in the second seat? I mean, like from my perspective, I don't see a path where Yuki was going to stay on with Racing Bulls past this year anyway. So that I think that's really important to consider because this is a prove it potentially one and done year for Yuki anyway. So you might as well do it in the top team if you're going to have that opportunity, right? Because I think they have Lindblad who is in Formula Three right now, who is very highly regarded. There's some rumors that he's going to get a seat next year. Haidar looks like he's got some pace, looks promising. I think at this point, it's way too early, but there's no reason to expect that he won't still be in that Racing Bulls next year. And so there's not really a spot for Yuki if he hangs out with the junior team. And that's also not really what it's meant to be. I mean, like we were saying earlier, he's a veteran now. And so what good is it to have a guy like that in your junior team if you don't ever see a chance of promoting him? So I think this is the perfect time for Yuki to be in the Red Bull. So I'm excited to see what he's got. On the flip side for Lawson, like we were saying, he's barely raced in F1. And I think what he needs is just some structure and some consistency because he was in and out of the Racing Bulls, right? He joined halfway through the year, never got a full sort of warm up testing, things like that. He took over for Ricardo. Then he was out. Then he was back in the Racing Bulls. Then he was in the Red Bull for 3 races. And now he's back in the Racing Bulls. So I think he just needs a 5, 6, 7, 8 extended race run in the same car that is, tuned to him in some way just to get a little bit of comfort. And then we'll see what he really is. And, that Racing Bull looks like it's not a terrible car. So there's no reason to think that he can't still compete and maybe push for points in a weekend where there's some DNF. So for him, the challenge is going to be, can he rise to the occasion or is he going to, sputter out? And this will be the last we see of Liam Lawson.
See, and I think Yuki has that mentality, that aggressive mentality that's closest to Max in terms of like everybody that's been there. And I really
Hmm.
think he can translate that into car performance. I think he does drive kind of more towards the front end, right? Headstrong in his way. So I think he could be able to better adapt to that. It would just be ironic if Yuki gets dropped out of Q1 this weekend and Lawson gets makes a Q3 appearance.
There's totally a world when that happens too.
Oh,
I'm here for it. That chaos would be cinema.
but then it comes down to a point where it's like, okay, Red Bull tried everything. What's next? Like, do you bring Ricardo back if like this Yuki stint doesn't happen, right? I mean, there needs to be some form of consistency because you can't expect your drivers to be flipping in and out of teams every 2 rounds.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why I think this is it. Like Yuki is gonna play out the season
Yeah.
with Red Bull, regardless of how much he struggles. I can't see a swap back with Lawson. And there's really nobody else who's sitting around ready to be pulled in F1, right? So we mentioned they have a talented rookie in the junior formula. He's not ready to come up yet, certainly not in the Red Bulls. So they're going to have to let this play out. And I think that plays into Yuki's hand. This is the best opportunity he's probably ever going to get in Formula One, and he's got to seize it.
Yeah. Oh, and I hope he takes advantage of it because it's his home GP coming up at Suzuka. We'll do a preview episode next week of it, but I mean, what great way to kind of make your home debut in the team that you want to be with, but then maybe a podium finish. Like, imagine that. Like,
Could you
Japan would go
imagine?
nuts.
Wow, that would be incredible.
Well, thank you so much, Tyler, for joining this week's episode, season 5, episode 4. We really appreciate you having on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, especially when it comes to Red Bull. You were honestly the best person to have on this week because of that chaos that ensued, with your team. But for everybody, please follow us on Spotify. Please follow us where you can get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, as well as our LinkedIn, or not LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We have a link tree in the description. So please follow us there. Tyler, any thoughts before we head out for this week's episode?
So many, but I'll leave it with I would give anything to see a Yuki podium in Japan. I think you nailed it. If that were to happen, that would be easily the best story of the year so far. So that's what I'm rooting for.
If Oscar knew what was best for him, he'd let Yuki win. Put it that way.
Yeah, if he wants to make it out of Japan, he's got to let him pass in the
Yeah,
last lap.
exactly. So we'll leave it there. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope everyone has a wonderful week. We'll be back next week with a preview of Suzuka. And let's see, more chaos to come our way.